Hello, everyone. I'm Wendy Seelig, and I'm so privileged to be here to moderate this informal discussion between Audra Moran of Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance and Dr. Richard Pazdur, the head of the Oncology Center of Excellence at FDA. Today, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so in an informal discussion about progress in ovarian cancer research in general, opportunities, and some personal reflections. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. So with that, Audra, maybe you could start with a brief introduction and maybe also share some of your personal connections to the work that you do.
Absolutely. I'm Audra Moran. I'm the president and CEO of Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance, and that's OCRA. OCRA is the largest nonprofit in the world working to fight ovarian cancer, dedicated solely to that. We fund research, we do advocacy, and we also provide support for people that are going through a diagnosis. And again, we're going to talk, I think, a lot about that today. So I won't go into too much detail, but in terms of my personal focus for OCRA, initially I was interested in working in the field of women's health. I have a really strong passion for medical research grant making. That's been the focus of my whole career. And now I've been with OCRA for 13 years. And during that time, I've had the opportunity to get to know so many incredible women who've been impacted by this terrible disease. And I have lost a lot of people along the way. So I now too have, sadly, a personal connection. But I've also seen some tremendous progress that's being made in this disease that has so many challenges. Though it's really considered a rare cancer, ovarian is the deadliest of the gynecologic cancers, and it's the 5th leading cause of cancer death in women. And while the biology is really less understood than many other diseases with lower mortality, the progress that's taken place in just the last 5 years is incredible. It seems we're really on the verge of even more rapid development, and being a part of a nonprofit that works so closely with researchers and other people that are involved in helping patients, like our friends at the FDA, is just really, truly inspiring. And I'm just glad to be here, and I'm so glad that Dr. Pazdur was able to join us today.
Thank you. And Dr. Pazdur, and maybe today we can refer to you as Rick since we're having an informal discussion. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your many, many years of service at the FDA, and prior to that, your service to patients in medical oncology. You've been part of so many amazing changes and breakthroughs. We really are all very grateful for the work that you do. And we're so glad to have you here with us today to talk about the field of cancer research and progress. Also share some of your personal reflections. You've been incredibly generous with speaking about your personal story, and we would love to see if we could bring some of that out here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate being here. Just a few words about myself. As Wendy pointed out, I'm the director of the Oncology Center of Excellence, which is a part of the FDA. It started as part of the Moonshot program when Joe Biden was vice president nearly 5 years ago. And obviously with the reshot of the Moonshot program or reconstitution of it now, we look forward to perhaps discussing some of our projects that we have ongoing that will continue throughout this kind of OCE version 2, so to speak. Just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Chicago. I did all my medical training there, met my wife there, and I'll be happy to talk about our experience dealing with her ovarian cancer. But I then went to Detroit and worked at Wayne State University, which had one of the largest oncology programs in the 1980s and really specialized in drug development and GI oncology and oncology education. And then in the late 1980s, I went to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, and also worked in GI malignancies and drug development, medical education. And then in 1999 came to the FDA. And here again, saw it grow throughout this 22-year period of time that I've been there, from a staff that had about 12 medical oncologists when I initially arrived, and these were jacks of all trade. People would do ovarian cancer, people would do breast cancer, people would do lymphomas, depending on what type of day it was, to a time now that we have over 100 medical oncologists working at the FDA, and all of them are disease specialized into the various malignancies, very similar to what one experiences at major cancer centers in the United States. So I have an interesting perspective. I'd be happy to talk about kind of the development of oncology, because I figured out 1982, which is 40 years ago from now, is kind of a landmark year. It was when I finished my oncology fellowship, so I could say that I was actually a medical oncologist, and this is my 40th anniversary. But it also represents somewhat of a sad event, and that is, it would have been my 40th wedding anniversary also too, because it was in 1982 that I became married to my wife.
Well, and you've mentioned that really that love affair also that you had not only with medical oncology and taking care of patients, but with your wife.
Yeah.
I wonder if you would share with the audience here what you went through from the perspective of the patient and the caregiver.
Yeah, it's so different because as a medical oncologist, we have a professional experience with cancer, okay? And that's the way it should be, because we have to have a professionalism in dealing with patients. But that's so different when it affects you on a personal level. And it's really kind of an irony, having an experience with cancer and having your life devoted to the treatment of cancer. But was even more, there were so many ironies with my wife's course of treatment. She was also a nurse practitioner in oncology throughout her entire really 40-year period of time that she was a nurse. And I always point out the fact that on my first day of fellowship in 1982 at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital in Chicago, I met my wife. And our first patient that we shared together had ovarian cancer. And unfortunately, the last patient that I had with my wife had ovarian cancer, and that was her. Okay, so there's an extreme amount of irony that encompassed and engulfed and encircled this whole experience that we had in dealing with oncology. I think, her background led us to really a different pattern of care, so to speak, because she knew the field very well, and being an oncology nurse, and really kind of took charge of her own course. People always ask me, well, Dr. Pazdur, did you direct your wife's care? And I said, no, you really have to understand my wife. She was the type of person that really wanted to take charge of her own care. And of course, she discussed major changes with us, but it was her leading the charge, really, even to the end, where she asked the doctor to be transferred to hospice, even though they had said, would you like to try other therapies? But her course of illness was very similar to what many women with ovarian cancer present with. It happened about 10 years ago around Memorial Day, or Labor Day rather, at the end of the summer, and we were coming back from Chicago, and she said, I just don't feel well. I just have all of this indigestion, and I'm taking all of these antacids. I really have to go see my gastroenterologist. And so she made the appointment to see her gastroenterologist. And he said, oh, Mary, this is nothing. You just have dyspepsia. And why don't you take some milk of magnesia and antacids and watch your diet? And 2 weeks later, the woman was in an emergency room, admitted to an intensive care unit with, multiple liters of ascites, a CA125 over the roof, so to speak. And the diagnosis was clear cut when we got back the laboratory test, basically, and her clinical course, which led to debulking surgery and then intraperitoneal chemotherapy and systemic therapy, then a rapid relapse of the disease within a year period of time after completion of the intraperitoneal chemotherapy, and then subsequent treatment with various forms of therapies. My wife was not BRCA positive at all, and it was a difficult course because here again, knowledge is valuable, but it also is a double-edged sword because you know what is coming, okay? And because you've experienced it. And that gives you the maturity in dealing with it. But from an emotional perspective, it really is difficult. In fact, I would have to say my wife handled the illness much better than I did, okay? And it just reflects our own personalities. My wife was just a stronger personality than I was. was, to be honest with you. The thing that it taught me from a professional level, however, was toxicities of the therapy. And I think that these are overlooked by most medical oncologists. You know, we view toxicities grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 on a piece of paper, so to speak. It's a much different thing to experience personally a grade 3 toxicity or a grade 4 toxicity. With one of the investigational agents that my wife was on, it was known to cause fatigue. And most people would say, oh, that's nothing. Well, yeah, it's something when, you know, you leave your wife at 8 o'clock in the morning and she's sitting on the couch saying she's tired and can't do anything. And you come back at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and she's still there. And she said, I can't get up off the couch. I'm just so fatigued. And people don't understand frequently the definition of fatigue and how impacting that could be on, let alone the toxicities that our patients experience. And because of that, you know, people frequently ask me, well, Rick, how has your wife's experience really impacted FDA oncology? And obviously I have to separate the two because one is a professional position that I have. And however, everything in life is personal, let's face it. And so I would have to say you would be almost inhumane or inhuman, basically, if an experience like this didn't impact you. But I think one of the major impact that I had was the recognition of toxicity. And because of that, we've really started investigating and establishing programs based on you know, patient-reported outcomes and taking them much more seriously and trying to bring rigor to them to really give the patient voice, not only in how well the therapies work, but also how adverse events and toxicities are described in product labeling and understood by the medical professional community. It's a much different thing experiencing these toxicities than just seeing them written, so to speak. And I think we always have to be aware of that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. First of all, we're so sorry for your loss, and we really appreciate how you have brought that forward into your professional world and helping patients every day based
Absolutely.
on.
I just want to say, I think that's really special. And I'm glad that you were able to articulate that. I think some people would have said, no, there has to be a separation, but that touches me and I appreciate it. I mean,
and you know, Audra, I think it's crazy to say it wouldn't affect you. You know, somebody asked me, in fact, there was a New York Times article, if people want to take a look at it, when my wife passed away, it's on the web, about her experience and my dealing with this. It was on a Sunday New York Times on the front page. So it was quite public, okay? And the question was, how did this affect you? And here again, people were surprised when I said it did, but like, how couldn't it? You know, how could, you know, like you'd have to be basically made of stone to say, you know, some event like that after being married to somebody for 35 years and going through, I don't know the correct word to use. I don't, journey is too mild of a word, but it was, and horrific is not the correct word, but it's between those two words, so to speak, of ups and downs during a 3 to 4 year period of time when she was dealing with the therapies of cancer.
And I think, Audra, you and your colleagues at OCRA, you know many people who have been through a very similar
story.
And it does sort of, I mean, it changes you. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be an ovarian cancer patient advocate, but when that becomes my reality, that's what I am. Maybe you can talk a little bit, Audra, about patient advocacy and how you view it, and then Rick, you as well, the opportunity to work with patient advocates, not just in ovarian cancer, but across the board. FDA has been incredibly proactive in engaging patient voice and patient experience. So maybe Audra, if you want to speak to that first.
Absolutely. In patient advocacy, really, and patients are at the center of everything we do at OCRA, including the selection of our research that we fund. We have, several people that are survivors on our review committee, and we think that's important. When I first came to the organization, we didn't, and I think that was a big loss initially. So we rectified that. And now we have, I think, at least 2 or 3 survivors who sit on the committee. We also train survivors to be research advocates, and they work with the DoD and a number of other funding agencies. And I think it's so important to have that patient voice. They're also at the center of all the programs we develop, obviously, and they're an important catalyst for change in terms of the policies that affect our community. And we work very closely with them to harness their collective power, because there really is power in a group. And while ovarian cancer is rare, it's a mighty group because they really care and they're very vocal, and it's wonderful. And anything we can do to help that, we do. So elevating the patient voice is really a large part of what we do every day, and whether that's directly by offering opportunities for them to engage in our process, as I mentioned, or serving on our review teams, or just being our volunteers at different things. We do also use them to educate medical students, and I think that might be a special interest to Rick too. But we have a program called Survivors Teaching Students, and they go into classrooms of people that are in medical school who may never see a case of ovarian cancer, and talk about their experience. And we've heard it's incredibly impactful. We reach about 14,000 students a year. So I think, again, it's at the center of everything we do, but that's one of our proudest achievements.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, really having the patient experience be part of really the regulatory process. I frequently ask when I'm interviewing medical oncologists to come to the FDA how they view themselves. Do they view themselves as an oncologist first and then a drug regulator, or do they view themselves as a regulator and then a medical oncologist? You could see where I'm going with this. Obviously, what I'm interested in is people that state that they feel that they're a medical oncologist first, because we have to have really, as any physician that is treating a patient, and we're treating not a patient, but the whole nation basically here, and advocating for them, that we have the patient foremost in the mind, not the drug regulation, so to speak. So we really have to hear from patients, and we have very early on put patients on our advisory committees, the ODAC meeting, the Oncological Drug Advisory Committee. We have a patient there. We incorporate them in our workshops that we do. We incorporate them in any decision-making process outside of the ODAC. We've had really formal relationships in many of the workshops with various of the advocacy communities, ranging from lung cancer to ovarian cancer to other cancers. But really, this is a hallmark, because really, we don't work for the regulations. We work for the US government, and the US government are the patients. They are the community. And we have to always remember that we are not the American Statistical Association making decisions based on a p-value, but we have to weigh the risk and the benefits of every application and every decision about what is in the best interest of the patients. And I always tell our staff that that should be our ultimate decision here, is what is in the best interest of the patient in making a regulatory decision. And if you keep that in mind, you will always be on the right side of history, so to speak. Where we have gotten into problems many times is when we are over-regulatory or too lax, and we have to sometimes be in the middle, so to speak. No drug application is perfect, but we have to take a look sometimes outside of the imperfections of many of these applications and ask ourselves that basic question: what is in the benefit of the patient? And ultimately, it goes back when I was into clinical practice, doing clinical trials. You give somebody a consent form, okay, and they read it, and it's 10 pages or something, and people, they're tense, they're frightened in reading this. And ultimately, people ask the question, Dr. Pazdur, would you give this to your mother? Would you give this to your wife? And that's the ultimate ethics question, okay? You could debate ethics back and forth, but that's the ultimate decision. Would you give this to your wife? Would you give this to your mother, so to speak? And that's the question ultimately we have to answer when we make a regulatory decision on an approval of a drug.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the oncology portion of the FDA has really set a standard for the agency as a whole, in large part thanks to you, Rick, of being out in the community and being present among patient advocacy organizations and patients so that you are hearing directly what is important to them. Just watching the time, I would love to have a little bit more of a forward-looking conversation now with the both of you in terms of what you see coming down the pike. We're not going to talk about any specific drug or any specific approach, but more generally in oncology, where is the future? What lessons are there for ovarian cancer, maybe from other progress in other tumor types? What are you most excited about? And, Audra, maybe we can start with you. What do you see that you are hopeful about?
I mean, right now, there's just so much that's, I think, exciting. It's terrible because ovarian cancer is such a terrible disease. I hate to say it's exciting, but the last 10 years have seen such incredible progress when I think there was so little progress, or seemingly so little progress for so long. I think that's unfair to researchers to say that there was no progress. It's just they were building blocks, right? It all builds upon each other. Right? And if it's not successful, that's still a success in a way. It's giving us information. But there's so many things that have happened. Right now, every year, fewer people are being diagnosed with the disease. And I think it could be attributable to risk-reducing use of birth control. We're not sure, but that's good. We'll take it. And for those that are diagnosed, there's more treatment options and people are living longer and better than they ever were before. There have been 3 new drugs in the last year that were made available, and they're targeted therapies. They don't work for everybody, but they do work for some people, and that's really encouraging and hopefully a lesson for us. There's genetic testing for hereditary cancer, which is exciting because it can give more personalized treatments, hopefully, to people in the future. And understanding the biology of the disease. Now we know that high-grade serous is actually starting probably in the fallopian tube. I mean, that's a huge step forward when obviously I think people thought it was the ovaries. So we know that. There's also a chance for prevention in that we could be proactive in talking to people about taking out their fallopian tubes. There's just so many things. I have more and more and more, but I'd love to hear what Rick has to say too. But there is a lot, and I think that's great and encouraging.
Having been in this field for 40 years, I have a historical perspective,
Right.
okay? So I'd like to share with you where we were in cancer in general and how we develop drugs and how the field really has changed so much in the past really decade. And the older drugs that your audience are familiar with, like the taxanes, Taxol and Taxotere and cisplatin, they were what I would call kind of the ancient drugs, basically, of oncology developed in the late 1970s, 1980s, so to speak. And that development program was what I call the needle in a haystack. People found drugs that inhibited cells in a test tube, so to speak, or in a petri dish, and then did a series of trials and said, well, it might work here because we saw a response. It might work here because we saw a response. We'll develop it in breast cancer because this is a big disease and we can make a lot of money off of it, so to speak, or in this disease because it's highly prevalent. So it was kind of, well, we developed drugs by a roulette wheel here, not on the understanding of the drugs. And then really after the start of this millennium, an important drug came along called imatinib for the treatment of CML, okay? Gleevec is its trade name. And that kind of revolutionized it and was ushered in the field of targeted therapies. And all of that was based on not so much the drug, but our increased understanding of the disease and the biology of the disease. And that's where I think the true promise holds for all diseases. And we've seen this not only in CML with imatinib, but throughout now the really entire spectrum of many of these malignancies. For example, lung cancer was defined as non-small cell and small cell lung cancer. Now that non-small is divided up into various small molecular subtypes of very small populations of patients that experience great benefit from a drug, and others would not have any benefit, but we know how to define that population. So I think our basic understanding is really getting away from all ovarian cancer is the same and understanding it more on a molecular basis, basically, and then tailoring therapies to those specific types, as you mentioned, we already have the advent of some of these targeted therapies, but I expect that area to grow also tremendously. And then the other area that has been highly transformative in oncology, albeit has not had a great effect or influence on ovarian cancer, is the development of the checkpoint inhibitors and our greater understanding of the biology and the immunology of the disease. And I hope that this will be extended with newer understanding of these markers based of these biological agents to an understanding of ovarian cancer and how they may work in this disease. Here again, I think these have been two of the most transformative things that have happened, getting away from this cytotoxic chemotherapy of let's just give these proverbial almost poison, so to speak, with horrendous toxicity, to much more sophisticated approaches. But that was based on basic understanding of the disease, then targeting and developing tailored therapies to these molecular targets, so to speak. And I think that is where I see oncology going, to smaller and smaller subtypes of populations. And that's great. It does pose some problems. You have to have tests that identify these populations, and you're going to have smaller populations. So you're not going to be able to develop drugs in a traditional fashion of doing large randomized trials looking at overall survival. You're going to have to be happy with a marker such as response rate or a biological marker to understand the effectiveness, since you simply cannot do large studies because you have smaller and smaller populations of patients. But I think the key, if I would have to summarize it in one sentence of where we want to go, is greater understanding of the disease, and number two, how our immune system works in handling the disease, because after all, cancer is a form of an immunological dysfunction, so to speak. The other point I want to bring out, which is so important, is earlier detection. And I hope we never lose sight of that, because I don't want to see patients diagnosed with stage 3 disease. And that's the most common presentation of the disease, okay? Because here again, yes, there are some people that can be cured with this disease, but the vast majority of patients with the most common types of ovarian cancer are not, unfortunately. So we really have to work on earlier detection of the disease also, and we should never lose sight of that.
And Wendy, one thing I'll add too is AI, which we're very excited about. We don't know what the implications will be for ovarian cancer, but OCRA has partnered with Microsoft's AI for Good Lab, and we are utilizing them to offer our researchers their computing power, essentially. So we're really excited about the area. And I know in 2019, I think the FDA actually approved the first AI-based software for breast cancer imaging. So we know that it's been used in other areas and had success in other cancers. So we're very excited and hopeful. We don't know where it will take us, but you know, it's the new frontier, essentially.
Wonderful. So I know we just have a couple of minutes left. I wonder if I could just ask both of you, maybe start with you, Audra. What one message would you like to share with the ovarian cancer community today? A message of hope, a message of opportunity, a challenge, empowerment? What would you like to share? And then Rick, I'll ask you the same, maybe speaking again from your personal caregiver perspective.
Sure. I will say again that I truly believe this is a really exciting time in the field of ovarian cancer research. If that's one message I can convey, there's innovation and rapid discoveries every day. And as an organization, OCRA is excited to see all these opportunities and also the challenges, because we're ready to take them on. You know, we're there to support the researchers as they do that. And we've been spending a lot of time positioning ourselves for this moment. So hopefully if I can reassure people and say, you know, we're here, and we got this, we're going to give it our best, we will. We see our role increasingly as a convener to bring all these parties together, including our friends at the FDA. And we are so grateful, Dr. Pazdur, to you and your team for all you do and for working with us. And I think conversations like these are incredibly important, so we should keep having them, and I hope we can. And I'll just say that I think we have a unique vantage point that's going to hopefully allow us the opportunity to address the gaps that we have identified, because we know there's gaps. And we're going to address them. And targeted therapies are exciting. Platform clinical trials are exciting. Genetic and genomic testing is exciting. There's a lot of things, a lot of, I think, reason for excitement.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Rick, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I just like to make sure that I thank all the people that work for me, because I am not isolated, so to speak. And I have a group of fantastic individuals, both from a medical oncology point of view, but for hematological malignancies, great group of people, our project management staff, our staff that handles all the regulatory issues and all the FDA bureaucracy, which, believe me, is mind-numbing, so to speak, the amount of bureaucracy there is in the government, but that's a whole separate discussion. As far as the leaving message for the patients, I just like to say, empower yourself. You are beautiful, okay? You are powerful. Knowledge is powerful, okay? Go after it, but always remember, you are not a victim. You have the power to change things. We are interested in hearing your voice. You have power. You are not a victim of this disease. So empower yourself with knowledge. Go after what you want. Live your life as it should be lived. So the major question, or if I could leave you with one word or two words, is empower yourself.
Well, that's perfect. That it really does encapsulate what patient advocacy is all about. And I want to thank you both. Audra, thank you for your leadership of OCRA and all you do. Rick, thank you for your leadership at OCE and at FDA, and for your willingness to be so personal about your story and to be so powerful in your words. And with that, I want to say thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody.